Welcome back to the Shop by Shop podcast. I'm joined by my co-hosts Oscar, Ryan, and Will. Today is a big day for 2023 as a year in film because the greatest filmmaker of all time, who we're very blessed that at his old age of 80, he's still living and making films, not just making films and making them on a absolutely top tier quality. The great Martin Scorsese has released Killers of the Flower Moon, which is very new type of style for Scorsese film, and we all have so much to talk about. Personally, for me, this is I'll just say now, this is a film that I can't really look at and talk about the same way I would some others, and I can't really see this from the perspective of the general audience and tell you, how you're going to feel about it as someone who hasn't followed Martin Scorsese's career, because this is someone who has literally changed my life. The impact Martin Scorsese's made on my own life, he's literally given me direction and showed me what it is I want to spend the rest of my life doing, and showed me the possibilities of what film could be, not just as entertainment, but as an art form. And is constantly, every time I hear the guy speak, I just feel so inspired and ready to take action myself. And I'm always, he's always inspiring me to see cinema in a new perspective, and not only from films of himself, but the way he has so much praise and appreciation for the films of others, and the way that now in his old age he's doing so much to stand up for the next generation of artistic filmmakers. And he truly is the just one of the greats of the craft, and he's learned so much in his long career and has really perfected the art of telling stories through pictures and cinema. So, Oscar, why don't you take us away? What are your initial thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon?
I've had a few weeks to kind of sit on my rating now. Obviously, I saw this at the UK premiere at London Film Festival a few weeks ago, and I'm definitely not as big on it as a lot of people seem to be. But I know I'm not kind of in as in the massive kind of minority, because I know a lot of people are kind of around the same level that I am. I liked this movie. I liked it a lot. I didn't love it. It's definitely gone up over time for me. Um, yeah, I think the way that Scorsese handled the whole kind of topic of the film, because obviously it's a really kind of deep and tragic topic to cover, and I think he really handled that so well. And I think a lot of filmmakers nowadays would struggle to do that in the way that he does. And I think he's kind of unmatched in that area, considering he has kind of obviously no kind of ties to the Osage and things like that, and he does it in a really respectful way. So I really respect him for that. As for the runtime, obviously the big kind of talking point of the film, I had absolutely no problem with it. I thought the runtime flew by. Honestly, I thought the pacing was absolutely brilliant, which is really good to see in a such a long film. The longest film I've seen in theaters, actually. And I think Scorsese, just not as a filmmaker, but kind of as a figurehead for cinema now, is just so important, because he's trying to kind of put film back on its right track, the way it should have been, the way it was, in kind of modern times. And I think yeah, like I said, he's more than just a director and a filmmaker. He's standing tall against a lot of bad things out there. But yeah, good film, damn good film. Ryan, your quick thoughts?
Yeah, I really did quite love this one. I watched most of Scorsese's films leading up to this, and this really does stand out as like an epic in his filmography, I think. Like many of his films, like there's a lot of top quality filmmaking, like phenomenal cinematography, production design and costume design, which you all expect from a Scorsese movie. But it's a film that I think like no matter it will leave an impact on you, like no doubt. Like even if it's not your type of film, the subject matter is just like so disturbing and horrific. Obviously based on a true story. But yeah, it really shines a light on it, like once again about like sickening human, or how sickening humans can be, and really brings forward a part of history that's completely been forgotten until now, pretty much. It's also just quite a special event, like Oscar was saying, like to see a new film from one of the greatest living directors, of which probably only have one or two, maybe three left, because he's getting up there in age, which is really sad. But yeah, I really liked him being like more selective at this point in his career as well, like what stories he's gonna tell, and still continuing to innovate like his filmmaking, like still like 60 years into his career, and especially at this age, it's taking risks and showcasing stories that are both unsettling and immensely significant, and shedding light to a sickening point in history still at this point in his career. But yeah, for me personally, it's not been the most stacked year, in terms of movies. But it was great to like see this type of quality film from Scorsese. Like, it's definitely been the highlight of the year so far for me, or up there. This and Oppenheimer are probably my top two. Both big budget epics, 3 hours plus as well. I really didn't feel the length on either of them as well, which is great. But it's something that probably won't see for a bit, and we don't see it often at all, really, anymore. And practically as well, not much CGI in either of them. It's just another great just for cinema in general. But yeah, this was a solid 4.5 out of 5 for me. I really loved this one. What about you, Will?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Ryan. I also have this at a 4.5 out of 5, 9 out of 10. I thought it was a phenomenal film, and I really am blessed that I got the opportunity to see this in theaters, because I think this is the first Martin Scorsese film I've seen in theaters, which is kind of embarrassing to say, I guess. But I guess our timelines didn't really match up, his filmmaking and me existing. But yeah, it was a treat. I caught it the first night it was out. Had a few days to sit with it, and I really do love this movie, and it's kind of grown on me day by day, and it is kind of a magnum opus. It is an amalgamation of Scorsese's entire career, and that word masterpiece gets thrown around a lot. But I don't know, maybe that title is heralded here because this is kind of just an amalgamation of all types of genres, all types of storytelling, all types of different filmmaking, and Scorsese really just flexes his muscles in a 3 hour and 30 minute film, going across every type of dramatic format you can feasibly have. Like, it's a courtroom drama in the third act, but it's also a western. It's a family drama. It's tragic. Like, there's just a lot of there's a blend of a lot of genres in here that I found was really stylistically. Um, it was stylistically brilliant and done well, and I just really enjoyed it overall. I didn't find the 3 hours that long. The length didn't really impact me that long, but I could, 3.5 hours, I can see why some people can't really sit through that. But I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that. But yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon, 9 out of 10. One of the better Scorsese films, in my opinion. Definitely a clean, crisp final result, and something that I think he's really proud of, because it's clear that this story was close to him, and he spent years trying to get this made. So yeah, a really great film. I couldn't recommend it enough, and definitely go check it out if you haven't already. But I'll kick it back to Alex, and maybe we'll get into the nitty gritty, give you a more in-depth analysis here of what's going on behind the curtain here.
Yeah, before we get into kind of the more scene by scene that we're going to do for this episode, I do want to touch on a couple things in terms of the overarching film, and that's that sort of I just mentioned, how much the Scorsese film means to me and the impact it is just every time I get to see someone who's inspired me this much make a film, and how much I followed, the evolution of his career. And I think that this falls into the category of Scorsese where it's not like an Irishman or Silence where you see a culmination of all these themes he's been building throughout his career in different styles. I think it more falls into films like Shutter Island and The Aviator, where Martin Scorsese is a great storyteller and he sees an interesting story that he has curiosity about, and he just knows how to tell this story. And those are the films that kind of break off from the more traditional Scorsese style and the Scorsese themes you see in a lot of his other work. Whereas it's kind of something fresh and new in him experimenting with different styles of storytelling. And I think he's great at both. I really love to watch both. And the beginning of this film, like I absolutely loved it. But as the film went on, I can't lie, and I have to be totally honest. On first watch, all I felt when I left that theater was pure disappointment. I really can't even describe how disappointed I was because of, and I thought maybe were my expectations too high, but I also had unrealistically high expectations for The Irishman, and I absolutely loved that on the first watch. And it felt like it was too dialogue heavy. And Scorsese's known for very high volume and very kind of not always fast energy, but always very high volume. And music always has a great importance on it. And I felt like the music was very underlying and subtle and unmemorable. I thought the sound design was non-existent, and it was a lot of just kind of stop and talk coverage. And I was really like sitting there trying to figure out why at this point in his career Scorsese would take that approach to the film. So to be honest, I truthfully thought it was like a 4 out of 5 on a first watch. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 just because it's Scorsese, and I just trusted it. I said there has to be things I missed. There's no way that at this point in his career Scorsese would make something the quality that I thought it was on a first watch. So I'm like, I just need to see this again because I know there's a lot I missed. And then I watched it again, and yeah, I was right. I absolutely missed a ton on this film. It's now gone up to a 5 out of 5. And the approach Scorsese takes here really is all about the whole entire style of the film is all about subtlety. And it's by far his most subtle film. And I think why it's so fitting is because, we see films about some of the horrors done in history, and it'll normally be like a grand slaughter or some kind of big climactic event. There really is none of that in this story. And I think what makes it so horrific, what was done to the Osage people in this film, is how subtle and kind of creeping in it was. The way it's like you kind of creep in through marriage and then killing them slowly and subtly through sickness. I just think the tactics and attempts that were done on the Osage people were done in such like an infiltration and subtle way, which is why I feel like Scorsese chose to take that approach through his filmmaking by having some longer conversations where it's not just addressing the important things to the plot, whereas it's normal conversation and things like De Niro talking with Leo when he first their first conversation, and he subtly creeps in like, oh well, how have you been doing with women? Like, what type of women do you like? And he's just subtly planting the seeds of the Osage marriage tactic that they use. And I think just the way the music and the sound design all almost creeps in such a subtle way, and the way with the characters unfold their true colors in such a subtle way rather than this grand like, oh now he's the villain moment. It's all very slowly and subtly. So on a rewatch I realized that, like I said, this is a fresh Scorsese style movie, and it really comes down to the what the story is a part of history that was done in a subtle and infiltration way, and Scorsese treated his approach to filmmaking in that same subtlety, which I think brilliantly reflects what the story is. So once again, still on top, still the goat at telling stories, and genius once again proving me wrong for being disappointed because he's the best. But I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Yeah, I was not exactly what I was expecting completely going in. Obviously, expected it to be a slower Scorsese. I know you avoided the trailers, Alex, like you do with every film, but the trailer really made it out to be like this kind of mystery about who was doing the killings. It's like which shows the scene where Ernest walks in towards the end of the film and everybody's looking at him after the courtroom scene. It kind of has that with Leo saying, "Can you see the wolves in this picture?" So it kind of sets out that like mystery. So maybe it was a bit misleading. But I'm glad they didn't take that route because Scorsese did say himself like it would have been obvious who done it. Like the white men, you just instantly know anyway. It wouldn't be much of a mystery anyway. Um, and I've heard the books, what the book is like. Like it was from the perspective of Jesse Plemons' character. So it would have been a very different film if we followed the book. But I really like the changes that Scorsese and the co-writer Eric Roth made, like done with their adaptation of the book, like focusing on Ernest and Molly, like as the heart of the film. That really allowed us to like to connect to the Osage people, through Molly's family, and allowed us to see both sides of the story. I think, and Molly's side where she's in the dark sometimes, but and that constant like growing of anxiety and wondering about how many people she can trust around her like family, and outside of it, and just in the community in general. Um, and Ernest really allows us, or yeah, and the plan against her family for Ernest, which really allows us to get like a lot of time to digest like the disgusting acts that him and his uncle are planning, rather than setting up a mystery the way we wouldn't find out towards the end was part of the film. But yeah, I think that would ultimately like, fall flat. I think instead of this. But what about you, Will?
Yeah, I think Scorsese said that initially when he was writing it with co-writer Eric Roth. He said that they were good. They had the perspective of a who done it, but then it quickly became a who didn't do it. Right? I think he said that in an interview. So it was a really different storytelling approach to basically alter their perspective completely and really focus on a different character, a different relationship at the focal point of the movie as opposed to the book. Like the movie, it's really about Lily and Ernest. Like that relationship is so complex and there's so much going on there. Like this idea, like Alex and Ryan kind of touched on, of this parasitic relationship. Like Ernest is a parasite. He is essentially infiltrating and living off Molly. But there's also this kind of like simple naivety where he does love Molly and he really does love her and is doing this for her. So there's like a really complex, layered relationship between Ernest and Molly, and I think Scorsese's decision to really focus on that and flesh out those two characters and cast Leo and Lily Gladstone in those two roles was exceptional, because that's what the entire story is really about. And without them and without their story, the film really wouldn't work in the way that it does. So, yeah, I totally agree with Ryan. I'm really happy that this perspective wasn't from the detective, but more so Ernest and Molly. So yeah, just a really, it just shows the skill and promise of Scorsese, right? Like any you or me would have just made it a whodunit, but he's going to completely switch the perspective and make it interesting, something completely different, tell a story that's fresh and new, bring light to a historical past that isn't so kind, but definitely needs to be heard and talked about. So, yeah, I really, really appreciate what Scorsese did with this and his different approach to storytelling, like you guys mentioned. But Oscar?
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting one because, like Ryan mentioned, this was nothing really like the trailers what I was expecting, which maybe was why on kind of first I wasn't kind of really big on it. But I initially gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I'm now on a 4 out of 5, which is honestly where I think I'm going to sit on it. I know I haven't seen it again, but kind of what Alex was saying about his first watch, and this is kind of how I feel now. This film just didn't have that kind of pull towards kind of the interest of the story for me. And I'm quite a big history guy. I really kind of enjoy this, just learning about kind of parts of history that I'm not aware of, I guess. But I guess, like Alex was saying, this kind of subtle style of filmmaking from Scorsese is something we haven't really seen before, and maybe that's something on a second watch that I will appreciate more. But I think it's really interesting because beforehand in the Q&A that I saw with Scorsese and when he came out before the film, he was talking about kind of the relationship being a pivotal role, which it clearly was kind of in this and in the book, but for me, that kind of emotion in between those two roles didn't quite click for me in the way that he portrayed it, which I think is what's kind of locking it away from that kind of 4.5 and 5 range for me. But I appreciate him for trying to go for something different in his kind of filmmaking style from what we've seen before. I haven't even seen The Irishman, I'm going to be honest, yeah, this is definitely something that I didn't expect, and maybe on a second watch I'll appreciate it even more. But yeah, back to Alex.
Yeah, so I think now's a good time to get into. We're gonna, unlike what we normally do, where we kind of jump all over the place. We're gonna go kind of more linear in terms of how the story is told this episode, and kind of talk more scene by scene, at least with the important scenes, and go through it that way. And I guess real quick before we get into the very first scenes, I want to say that I think this is a film that really needs to be watched twice. And unfortunately, it's a film that very few people are going to want to watch twice because of its slow burn nature and its long runtime. So, but I think the reason for that is because, like I said, it's so subtle and everything creeps in that when you see it on a rewatch, that's when you really see the levels and the layers of deception and yeah, I guess really just deception and infiltration that was done by mostly by De Niro's character, Bill Hale, and also I think something else you see right away from in one of the very first scenes where we start off in the Osage people with their in their own language, and then we get the oil boom, and right there, I think it's worth noting that Scorsese has done a lot in terms of standing up for the younger generation of filmmakers, saying that advocating for them to get theater screenings, people like Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson and Ari Aster and all the younger filmmakers. What we're seeing here is Scorsese taking inspiration from the generation who was inspired by him, which is really cool to see. With he talked a lot about Ari Aster's kind of slow burn style and how that affected his approach to this. You see tons of Paul Thomas Anderson influence right away with the oil and just a lot of his approaches to filmmaking, like with reframes and dialogue scenes, and along with like the Coen brothers and No Country for Old Men, where they'll skip ahead of things that you would expect to see in another film, and they kind of just treat it like the subtle time jumps that skip ahead of things that you would normally expect to see, or just a couple examples of uh, Scorsese being influenced by the generation who was influenced by him, which is really cool to see. And yeah, so now getting right into it. So like I said, I was very disappointed on my first watch, but the beginning and the first couple scenes I absolutely loved right away on a first watch. I remember it was like I was watching that opening scene and I was just very interested, curious about where it was going to go. And the second there was like that speed ramp down to slow motion with the hard music drop, and you kind of hear that Scorsese style of rhythm, I was just like sitting back with the biggest ear to ear smile on my face, especially when you see the silent film cue cards come up because Scorsese loves to pay homage to all of the great films that came before him, as well as the more recent ones. And just the whole silent film sequence and story through pictures, I was just loving watching that. But I think on a rewatch, what I noticed is, this year we saw Oppenheimer from Christopher Nolan, and he does a lot of objective versus subjective with black and white and color. And Scorsese's subtly doing the same thing here with that, except unlike Oppenheimer, he flips them where the color is the more reality, and the black and white is what the rest of the world saw. The color is like the truth of what happened, whereas black and white is just what the rest of the world saw. And there's so little black and white because the rest of the world saw so little of the Osage people and so little of their culture and what happened to them. And so there is that black and white sequence of him talking about, or not talking about, but just telling everyone about how the Osage are the richest native tribe and all that. And it makes you think that they're well off. And then we go to color, we see how they're really being taken advantage of, where they don't quite understand money, so they up the prices on them and all those kinds. And yeah, so I think it was just really cool to see Scorsese with, or I'll put it this way, I think the energy with the music flowed very nicely in the opening sequences of the film before we get to meet Bill Hale and the plot really starts moving forward. Will, what are your thoughts on the opening couple scenes?
Yeah, the opening act is arguably my favorite act. Honestly, I was kind of gripped right from the rip, and like Alex said, like that first initial kind of multimedia silent film type storytelling. Really, was really impressed. It shows that Scorsese is a really competent art filmmaker as well because it's multimedia, right? Like he's going across, showing you different frames from the late 18 early 1900s to give you historical context, to give you information, to set up the story that's about to happen, but he does it in a very art inspiring way. Like it's not just some guy reading, oh, planes were invented and oil and cars were invented and this, it's a very dynamic, very thought-provoking, enthralling sequence that kind of drives you right into the context of it. Okay, we're right in the Osage community where oil is gold. And I absolutely loved that. I loved everything about that. I loved how they introduced Leo. Like, I love how his character is kind of simple. Like, he was a cook in the war. Like, he's kind of an irrelevant player. And it seems that all of his life he's kind of been that irrelevant player. But when he strolls into this Osage town, it kind of shifts. And King Bill Hill is going to set him up and kind of make him a big time player in kind of a life or war that he was never really a big time player. So I think that's a really cool character introduction, and it's done so stylistically and artistically. So, yeah, I totally agree with Alex. That opening shot when he's coming off the train was really, really great. I loved it. Ryan, did you have any comments on the opening shots?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I really loved the first kind of like half as well. It's actually quite fast paced. Like it reminded me, the pacing kind of reminded me of Wolf of Wall Street. Even like I rewatched that the other week, and you don't realize how rich he gets just in the first 40 minutes. Like he's basically already at the point where he's like properly into like just having lots of money by that point, and it feels really quick. And at this point in the film, about 40 minutes, they're already married. Like it's insanely quick. I think this first half. But yeah, it kind of tricks you if you don't know what you're coming into. It kind of tricks you into thinking this is going to be like a fast-paced Scorsese flick at the start. Like there's a lot of electric moments where like the score really shines. Like Alex was saying, like almost making you like think it's gonna be classic Scorsese. Like that scene with the exploding oil at the ground is probably one of the best examples. Or when Ernest is leaving the train, like that the score really shines. It's like loud, fast, exciting, but although that maybe will have been more appealed to a mass audience, like it makes it instantly very clear that it's not going to be what you expect just in those moments. It's not going to be a fun filled at every moment like a Goodfellas or a Wolf of Wall Street, but there's some great moments where the score really shines, particularly in that start. And there isn't really much big musical moments throughout the film after that. Like the score perfectly matches that, and it's quite ominous, the soundtrack, the second half, compared to the first. I've been re-listening to some of it, and I've just been re-listening to the start of it because it's quite sad. It matches like how somber the rest of the film is once you get through it. Yeah, just once Ernest gets off that train, like Scorsese from the go instantly just showcases kind of the state that the Osage community's in. We see large amounts of wealth that the people have come into, and the kind of white intruders that have came to take advantage of that wealth. And may not necessarily be as bad as what we see later on from Ernest, his uncle, but we see them try to scam them for just pictures coming off the train, or try to bargain to sell them cars, or marrying into their rich families for their wealth. It just kind of leaves an instantly a bad taste in your mouth just in general, but the whole state of the community really setting the tone for the rest of the film. But yeah, that first half was probably one of my favourite bits as well. What did you think about it, Oscar?
Yeah, I think this is a really kind of solid introduction. I really enjoy kind of getting kind of immersed into the culture. So I feel like doing that straight away, kind of having it in their own language right off the bat is a really, really kind of good idea, and it's a really interesting way, an interesting perspective, I guess, of showing it. But it works really, really well. I love kind of when they're driving in down to kind of his uncle's house, and you can kind of see the greed is already starting when he's kind of asking him, "Oh, like who owns this land?" and things like that, and obviously he responds, "Oh, like we own this land," and you can just see kind of from his facial expressions and things like that, like subtly, like he's already starting, he's already thinking way ahead, and yeah, just kind of everything about that, I guess. I wasn't kind of massively gripped, definitely on kind of my initial thoughts on kind of the first part of the movie. It didn't really grab me. I kind of said initially there were sparks of it that kind of were pulling me in occasionally, but kind of letting it go. But I think kind of over time I've come to kind of appreciate those, appreciate the more kind of subtle bits, because I think on kind of that first watch, I was looking for that usual kind of Scorsese pull. You kind of see flashes of it later, kind of in the first half, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, as for kind of the introduction and that kind of first train scene, I thought that was really, really solid. I really liked that.
Yeah, and then of course after the train, and also like I did love like just the visual storytelling of like the smoke of the train through the people, which is I think some just brilliant visual storytelling from Scorsese, just kind of how they're polluting this land, and kind of smoke is often used not in a very positive way, and I think that's how it's meant to be used here, where it's almost like they're dirtying the land of the Osage, and it's through all the people with the pollution. So I thought that was a great visual image to start it off. Also, just with Leo doesn't say one word, just sitting behind the one native on the train, and just the look of disgust on his face is it's much more effective than any line of dialogue would be. And then of course then we get the right out of the off the train. It's this feels very Scorsese, and having Ernest played by Leo walk through the atmosphere, which he does a great job of making feel very full. Like the way he fills the frame around Leo makes it feel like so claustrophobic, with like the cars like fully stretching the frame vertically, and moves all the way through. And then just from the before, all of what we see now is build up to the introduction of Bill Hale. And what do we see first? We see the red car, which is super nice and stands out from the other cars, which are more beaters. So we know that whoever sent this ride for him is obviously very well off. And he has a native driving, or one of the Osage people driving for him, which kind of is already letting us know that even though these Osage people are supposedly very rich, a lot of them, some of them are working for Bill Hale. And then we have the drive through, and this feels very kind of like a shot from Once Upon a Time in the West, where we see Claudia Cardinale's character go through all of the Western environments. But here, Scorsese puts its own storytelling spin where it's like the right corner just drags, like expanding the frame, and we just see towers and towers of oil mines. And now we see kind of how the land's being used to kind of mine this oil like gold. And we think as we're going there that it's all owned by Bill Hale. And then we get to Hale's house. We later learn on rewatching it this isn't what he owns yet, at least it's what he wants. And then it's like just going over cattle, and then we land on Hale's house, and he portrays himself as just a this is just a cattle ranch. And because at this point he's not in name the one who owns all the oil, but he soon will through his infiltration tactics. And I think just purely cinematically, without any words, doing all of those small things to introduce us to Bill Hale is great build up. And then once we get to him, we get easily the best performance from Robert De Niro since Jackie Brown in 1997, who just with this stillness and intensity in his face is able to communicate so much, but also having this kind of grandfatherly old man charm to him, where at all times he's a guy who, if you met him in person, is probably a pretty likable guy. And you would never think that he's capable of the evils that he clearly is. And then we, of course, has to have the conversation, which I kind of touched on about how it seems normal, and we get some backstory as to Leo's character, why he's here, what's the relationship, and then he kind of creeps it in, like, oh, like how do you deal with women, like what type of women do you like? Do you like Native American women? So just subtly planting the seeds of without directly saying like here's the plan, or like oh how much money you could make by by marrying one of the Osage. Like he just creeps in and subtly plants the seeds, which is I think a brilliant writing decision rather than what a lot of other films would do, which would be clearly lay out what the plan is for the audience right away and then watch them try and execute it. They just kind of subtly creep it in so it more hits us hard by the end. But Ryan, what did you think about the opening kind of introduction to Bill Hale?
Yeah, I really like that, like kind of introduction, him coming back from the war, just to the two characters, really set them up quite well. Like Will was saying, like how Ernest was like a just a cook in the war, kind of set up. How he's kind of just he's kind of dim. He's not really the leading man. He's kind of and we find out later on he's quite influenced by his uncle and just kind of follows what he does. But yeah, this cast is stacked with so many great performances of the year. Like Alex was saying, like I never thought at this age we would witness like such a remarkable performance from like Robert De Niro again. Nor did I think he would actually be such a significant role in the film, like when it was announced. But yeah, playing such like a important figure, like that kind of mayor type figure in the community, like it perfectly portrayed like that character that seems like he's extremely friendly, but at the same time he's like a very evil man, like behind the scenes, and he's kind of the villain of the movie. Um, However, this side doesn't really try to be hidden, obviously, which is a really interesting approach because it's immediately like explained with his plan. Try to explain it to Ernest quite early on about what they're going to do with the families. But yeah, I think De Niro delivers a performance that's possibly best supporting actor winning worthy. It may actually be my favourite pick to win it right now. But yeah, he sets up Ernest so well and as well at this point. Like I think this is um, probably one of DiCaprio's more interesting characters. Scorsese's obviously no stranger to building a like flawed protagonist, but I think he's really up there as possibly the most evil. Even though it may not seem like that straight away. He's kind of usually uses evil, like kind of larger than life and like flamboyant characters. But this one's quite quiet in their villainous nature. Like they kind of hide it, especially most of the film. They kind of have that one side where they're appearing to like build a family and actually care about the Osage community, but immediately in the next scenes they'll be like planning how they're going to kill them with his uncle. It's just very bit like quiet evilness that doesn't really show like as much as like any of these other protagonists in other movies. But yeah, when it's announced that DiCaprio and De Niro are like going to be working like beside each other, you naturally have like high expectations. But I really think they did manage to surpass at least my expectations. Ernest is quite a controlled character compared to his usual roles. I think it really showcased his talent for truly embodying his characters, allowing you to really forget that you're watching Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the biggest stars in the world. And that's sometimes a problem with Leo's performances, especially in a couple of Scorsese's, even for me, like Aviator and Gangs of New York. Sometimes you just can't forget that you're watching Leonardo DiCaprio. And those films are also kind of period pieces. So I think that just kind of can take you out of the film if you're constantly being reminded that it's Leo, but I think he really morphs into Ernest in this for me. It kind of looks like shit at times as well in this film, with his facial expressions and his teeth being a bit screwed up. But yeah, he still looks good because he's Leo, but it's small stuff like that which really helps. And I think it was quite a physical performance from him, so I really enjoyed Ernest in this movie. But yeah, Oscar, what did you think of Leo and De Niro?
Yeah, I thought this dynamic worked really, really well. Like Alex said, absolutely one of De Niro's best performances in years. He was such an intriguing character, and I think, he was the perfect person to play because he just drew in your kind of interest into that character specifically, and even at the age he is now, it's so good to see that. Leo, I thought, put in a fantastic performance as well. And I think this is such a great kind of dynamic introduction between these two characters. It's kind of funny. You kind of see in this scene, obviously, he has that smile and villainous look on him when he's kind of talking to De Niro, when he's asking him about women and things like that. And for the rest of the film, he's basically got a frown on his face the entire time. Which I think is quite funny because I don't know, that's one of the things I picked on. Maybe I was a nitpicky about it, but obviously that's part of his character, which is quite clever. But I just think it's quite funny that he has that frown on him for the most part of the film. But yeah, the teeth were hilarious when he's smiling. It took me out of the film at multiple points. But yeah, it's they've really worked well off each other. A film, I think they complement each other really well. There's definitely an interesting scene about halfway through this film, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, which surprised me quite a lot. But I don't know why people aren't talking about it more. I've hardly heard anybody talk about it so far. But yeah, this is I really enjoyed this introduction for these two characters. Will, do you got anything to add?
Yeah, I thought the acting in this was great. We kind of touched on it. This big scene between Ernest and King Hill. I am not as high on the Robert De Niro performance as you guys. I thought that he was maybe third best in this. I would have had Lily Gladstone, Leonardo DiCaprio, and then De Niro in third. I think at times his performance feels a little forcing. I would have liked him to have that creepy, more openness at the beginning to kind of draw you in a bit further. My red flags were going off immediately. I knew he was a creep, and obviously that's not the twist that he's the bad guy, because it is pretty set in stone. But maybe if there was something more redeemable about him, something that you could latch onto him or sympathize him with a little bit to make his character a little bit more than just pure evil. But it's based on a true story, so he was just a terrible guy. But yeah, the performance is. It's solid, but I wouldn't put it up in among De Niro's best. I just don't think it has the range or quite the body of some of his other performances. And it is kind of a side character role. It's not really the main character, so he does kind of have to play support. And I think when he is in these scenes with Leonardo DiCaprio, although he is playing support, he's kind of the puppet master, because he is just kind of egging on Leo. He is using Leonardo DiCaprio, Ernest, as a pawn, and basically using him to infiltrate the Osage family and get this money. So there's kind of this kind of push that De Niro's character always gives Ernest, and kind of just shoves him along in this perspective that, oh, what we're doing isn't so bad, but if you just kind of follow me and do what I do, we'll get through this together. And he's kind of got this grip, he's got this hold, puppet master type relationship with Leonardo DiCaprio that I think worked really, really well. So that's not a discredit to De Niro's performance in that sense. I just didn't think it quite hit the levels of Lily Gladstone and Leonardo DiCaprio. But yeah, De Niro, he's a great actor and he kills it in this role. Just maybe not as high as you guys. But I think we can move kind of into the plan starting to unravel here. So it's pretty obvious that King Hill wants his family members, these white men, to marry in to this Osage community to get their wealth, to accrue their inheritance. And basically, as this plan kind of starts happening, there's a series of murders that go down and a series of Osage women, children, and men that are killed. And I thought this was a really good kind of transition scene. You kind of see the Scorsese flair here a little bit. We get these really tense kills, kind of that come out of nowhere, seemingly. They're pretty vicious and fast, just like how they should be and how they would have been. Um, and it was intense. It really kind of drove the severity of the film, and it locks you in at that point. Like this is freaking real. They're not just talking about stealing some oil. They're gonna murder some people for it. So I think this kind of transition into this dark, deceitful journey that Leo and De Niro kind of go on is a really nice turn and a really good turning point about after the first act. But I'm curious to see what you guys thought about this kind of turn. Ryan, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think once we kind of hit this point of the movie, that's really where the emotional beats for me at least really worked, like through Ernest and Molly's relationship, because you're kind of seeing how everything's impacting Molly, and I think that's where a lot of the emotional moments do come from, especially through Lily Gladstone's performance, which I don't know if you have her at first, but I definitely agree that she definitely did steal the show in this film, delivering like an outstanding performance, like seemingly effortless. She really was like the powerhouse performance, I think, which is really impressive. Like when you've got Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro like alongside you, they like you somehow outdo them in the movie. Yeah, but she really is the heart of the film. Everything moves for Molly and her relationship with Ernest, like, and I think as she's starting to lose her family at this point, like, and that growing anxiety, like, she begins to not really trust anybody, and that really does, you really feel along with her side, about the growing anxiety around her. She even starts to suspect her own husband at that point, and you start to really feel for her. And I mean, that's people say that it really doesn't really have emotion in the film, but I think if you really sympathise with Molly, that's where a lot of it comes from. And Lily Gladstone portrays like every one of her emotions so brilliantly through her like just facial expressions. Just by looking at her, you can see like the inner workings of like what her character's thinking and what she's going through. And yeah, I think people, quite a lot of people said that she's kind of like put to the side, and I didn't really think that. Through her, you kind of see like how bad like the community really is. Like there really isn't a white man in this movie that isn't just like scum, pretty much. Um, like from our main characters like Ernest and Hale, William Hale, like just all the way up to the government. Like when she like goes and like tries to get help, there's nobody really seems to care. So yeah, it's just all the emotional beats. But yeah, probably the most impactful kill for me was Molly's sister Anna. When she's kind of brutally killed, just and dumped in the middle of nowhere. And that's really kind of where the Osage people like start to fight back. They arrange that meeting where you kind of see how far William Hale has like infiltrated himself into the community. Like that he's there with, it's kind of him and I don't remember his name, but there's like him, Ernest, and somebody else. Like they're only really like the white people like there. They've kind of like fully into the community. But yeah, nobody really else seems to care. And eventually Molly has to hire her own private investigator, which they also end up killing. So yeah, it's just that's all just the gruesome like evilness of just all the characters in the film. But Alex, what did you think about the murders?
Yeah, another scene I really loved on a first watch, which really just felt so like chillingly intense and got me so interested into the plot of the story was that first sequence that introduces Molly, where we don't know it's Molly yet. We don't recognize the voice, and we just hear the repetition of no investigation. And I think where Scorsese's storytelling really shines most in this one is his juxtaposition of scenes, and I think the placement of one scene into each other is really so brilliant. And on a rewatch, you see kind of like you feel another layer of like irony on a rewatch just by the way the scenes are placed next to each other. And I think one of the best examples is right after that meeting with Bill Hale with Leo in the beginning, where Hale says the final line of the scene is he says, "The Osage people are some of the finest people on God's earth." And right after that, we see the high Scorsese loves to show dead bodies from a high angle, almost like a divine presence looking down. And we see a high angle, and we see looking down on one of the Osage people who is it looks like it's overdosing of or some kind, and we're curious as to why we're seeing this, what caused it, and all of these things. And on a rewatch, oh, like Bill Hale caused it, so it's showing you, his hypocrisy, but also Scorsese's so good on the first watch of making us curious about what we're looking at before we know, and constantly changing your perspective on it. Because then we see like old football footage, and we're like, "Why are we watching football? Like, what does this have to do with anything?" Then he takes the helmet off, and we see that it's one of the Osage people, and then just continuing with the repetition of no investigation, no investigation. And we're also seeing is Scorsese has a very new in his later films like Silence, The Irishman, and Killers of the Flower Moon. He treats death very differently, and it's very quick, very sudden, and there's this always this kind of lingering on these dead bodies that we see. We just kind of have to linger on the lifelessness of a body, and I think a lot of that has to do with Scorsese being at an older age in his life and probably thinking a lot about when his time unfortunately will one day come. And then after the repetition gets broken by, we see one of the Osage people, and now it's in well they're in color, but we see in color and she's still alive. And then the gun comes out of the window in a beautifully composed shot where just like bang shoots her dead, and then it says suicide. And now what we're seeing there is we're seeing new and smarter tactics from Bill Hale to kill the Osage people and get away with it. And I just thought that whole just the underlying score in that whole sequence was so chilling. The way Lily Gladstone delivers the voiceover with that slow, kind of more tone to her voice, I thought was brilliant and very effective. And yeah, I just think it's another example of Scorsese as a brilliant storyteller. But and then we get, of course, to when Molly meets Ernest, where he persuades her and like leads her into his cab through the crowd, where we see the atmosphere of all different people trying to have different scams and hustles to take advantage of the Osage money, and everyone's like trying different persuasion tactics, and we see Leo successfully persuade her into his cab, and then before it starts moving, it's interrupted by the character. I think his name was Kelsey, and he has we see him with a native girl. And typically, when we see movies that are set in the past that deal with interracial relationships, there's always like this kind of stigma to it and a disapproval from the other people around them. So what we're all as audience members used to seeing when we see any kind of interracial relationship in a period piece like this, we're expecting to see disapproving families and kind of a tabooness to it in terms of their peers. But here it's like we see a lot of the white men with Osage women, and it makes us a little curious as to why it's become so common. And even before we know the what the scheme is, we're curious as to we're waiting for disapproval from the characters like Bill Hale, who are waiting for him to disapprove of the marriage, not encourage it, which is makes us curious on a rewatch that you see, oh, that's why, there was never any like taboo to it because there's a benefit for the characters like Bill Hale to come from it. And this film clearly draws a lot of inspiration from George Stevens' 1956 film called Giant, which deals with it's a western, deals with big oil money families and deals with interracial relationships. And there it's what we that's where we see, in a film like that, we see a lot of disapproval from the families who really need to adjust to it. But here we see there's a lot more layers and deception to it, and it's not very pure intentions at all. But and also that film Giant, just side note, is one of the best performances in film history from James Dean, which was the last performance of his career. So shout out to that. But yeah, and then once we introduce Molly, there's like a family photo of her sisters, and their mother, and then it cuts into her, like just a close up of her. And just with those two still visual shots, it's so foreshadowing of the fact that she's going to be the only one of the four who will be alive at the end of the film. which is another just visual storytelling and great foreshadowing from Scorsese. And then the subtle I talked about, like kind of the No Country for Old Men subtle time jumps where she's in his cab, and then we cut ahead to now we don't know how it's past it. We don't even know it's a time jump at first, but now he's picking her up. So now we know that him driving her is becoming a regular thing. And at first it's like he's taking her somewhere. So like why is she getting back in the cab before we realize that it's a time jump? And I think one of the best scenes in the whole phase of Ernest and Molly meeting is when he meets her mother for the first time, which obviously, meeting your other mother or families can always be an intimidating thing. And Scorsese does a great, like I said, there's not that disapproval from the Bill Hale characters, but there is from Molly's mother. And originally we have this like moving point of view shot where the camera's moving in one direction as it's sliding in another. And then it lands on it, like slides past the doorway to reveal Molly's mother with a disapproving stare. And then we cut back, and Ernest still hasn't arrived to see the mother. And then we see like the walk up and the reaction again. So there's just that really subtle mismatch of the point of view versus Leo himself, like that we weren't actually in his point of view. The camera is actually moving a couple seconds ahead. It's just such a subtle, brilliant way Scorsese like sets the tone for this unsettling feeling uh, with the situation, and then just having a very dark atmosphere around them, with which is super quiet as well, just sets the tone for kind of the discomfort there, and really letting us know the mother's disapproval of Ernest. But Oscar, do you have any thoughts on the whole introduction of Molly, the murders, and the kind of honeymoon phase of them?
Yeah, I think it's a really really good scene, and there's a kind of a lot of contrasts between kind of these scenes going back and forth. You're moving from this kind of Scorsese subtle style, which we haven't really kind of seen in a while, to his kind of signature quick style that we usually see in his kind of his gangster films and things like that. And I think that's just really impressive to see that work so well. But yeah, kind of the introduction to Molly, I think is really really good. You see she's quite dismissive of him, and she's kind of playing around, kind of speaking in her own language that he doesn't understand, and he's trying to kind of how do I put this? Trying to kind of chat her up, I guess. And that kind of the smile comes back in to play with both of them. Actually, I think that's a really good kind of not storytelling, but moving forward for both of the characters, because yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but you can then kind of, after the famous table scene that we've all seen millions and millions of times overplayed on social media. But yeah, after that, we kind of get that really quick switch of style to the death scenes, which are really kind of quick cut, and I think really effective because of that juxtaposition of the subtle versus the quick styles, which I hadn't really appreciated on the first watch. I hadn't really appreciated then, but more do now. And on kind of leading on from that kind of the use of kind of Anna's death, I think is really clever, because obviously we don't actually see it in kind of the first part of the movie when we see the reactions to it. We kind of see what happens to it later down the line, and I think that's kind of really clever, because obviously he wants to just hit it. Scorsese just wants to kind of get that quick bit of kind of emotion in with kind of the reactions to it when Molly and Ernest first see it, and then you get that later down the line. You get that you sit on it for a while, and then obviously towards the end of the film, he allows us to kind of dwell on that, and then it kind of hits us with that flashback, which really shows us what happens, and it really really does hit like a truck. That scene, because that was probably for me kind of the most shocking scene of the film by far. I think the kind of the whole direction and editing was really really well done for those killing scenes, because it just added to the whole tone he was going for there. But yeah, really probably amongst kind of the best kind of chunk of the film for me. Those parts definitely.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Oscar that scene where he meets Molly's mother is kind of sneakily one of my favorite scenes. It's pretty subtle, but there's this aura of skepticism that the Osage people have, particularly Molly's mom, with the white people. and there's just this kind of deadpan face that they adorn all the time, almost like not giving them the time of day. They know, or at least Molly's mom seemingly knows what's going to happen. So it's really interesting that Molly, who's so skeptical, so smart, so stoic, this person that's been built up to be so smart, kind of falls for this guise. And I think that goes to show you how real it was for Ernest. Like, obviously this was a plan for his uncle to infiltrate and win the Osage money, but I think Ernest is just a pretty pragmatic, simple thinking guy. And when he started driving her to work every day, he fell in love with her genuinely, and then he was put in this really tough place, um, unable to kind of get out because he genuinely has this underlying love for Molly, but he's also a greedy bastard who is there at his uncle's beck and call. So I think that scene is a big transition point in the film when Molly kind of lets her guard down a little bit, and she kind of lowers the walls and lets Ernest in on it a little bit, which is a really, really powerful scene for the film. And I think it, again, exemplifies the acting of the two leads, because Leonardo DiCaprio kind of rambles. He's kind of got this bumbling performance where he's talking too much and maybe saying things he shouldn't say. Whereas Gladstone is a complete on the opposite side of the spectrum, much more reserved, way less dialogue, far fewer words. So they balance each other out pretty well. And I think that back and forth of kind of talking and looking and looking and talking works really well, and definitely the best in this scene. And I also wanted to talk about the visual storytelling with the mother. And there, I think you guys would have seen it when Molly's mother is basically on her deathbed. She sees an owl, this black owl, which essentially symbolizes death or coming death. And I thought that was really good, subtly done. But then Scorsese goes back to that. And when Molly is in dire shape, she also sees the owl. But we obviously know that Molly doesn't die at the end of the film. She dies in real life due to diabetes, but she doesn't die from the owl. But instead, where the owl once was in the doorframe, it's Ernest who takes on that spot. So there's just a lot of layers between. There's a lot of layers in this film, and Scorsese does a really good job of detailing that visually. And I think those scenes in the house with the mother, Molly, and Ernest are the best visual storytelling and some of the most subtly brilliant scenes in the entire film. So yeah, I can't praise it enough. I can't talk more about that scene. But yeah, Ryan, Alex, did you have anything else, or did you want to move on?
Yeah, I would just like to talk about like how you were talking about like Ernest kind of tricking Molly and that kind of like unknown nature of what he's like, and I think it kind of does that to the audience as well. Like, you kind of want to believe because of his charm that he's kind of not nearly as evil as other people, and that's obviously not true as you find out later on. But yeah, it's just he's kind of got that like, Leo charm still, like the charisma that makes you want to like him. He's definitely one of Leo's more interesting characters, like kind of more quiet side of evil. Yeah, he's just kind of a naive guy, which is kind of commanded and influenced by his uncle, and that kind of like grows throughout the film. He's evil, which you see later on. But yeah, also about the Molly, I really liked, or the killings. I really liked his use of time, like Alex was saying. Especially when he goes to finally show Anna's like how she was killed, like the whip pan that like kind of turns into a flashback. I thought it was such a good moment. And yeah, just kind of all of Molly's family, like her sisters, like they all have head rights. So like they obviously all have like people try to like take money from them, and we see like Bill Smith. He's married to one of Molly's sisters, and she's the first one to get killed, I think. And then he ends up marrying another sister as well. He's like got no shame, doesn't even try to hide it. He just goes straight to Rita, and they eventually marry as well. But yeah, just around this time of the film as well, like we see how like, William Hale's like influence on like the community. Like he's kind of got this power over the doctors, and we see Molly start getting that delivery of insulin, which he's claiming that she's one of the only 5 people in the world that's getting it, because she's obviously been dealing with diabetes the whole film. But yeah, that's kind of where those doctors are introduced as well. They're also very good for showing like his power on the Osage community. He's got like all those people that he's getting health insurance on, and then later killing them, and they're kind of like the other people that are getting killed in the community. They're not focused on as much, but there's I don't remember his name, but there's one of the main characters, the Molly's ex-husband that he eventually tries to kill or does kill. Um, but yeah, those doctors are just as evil as the rest of them. That they've just been helping him, and then they get this. They're basically poisoning Molly throughout the film. Yeah, and Molly rightfully starts to not trust him as well, and she becomes more cautious, but not cautious enough because she still has faith in Ernest at this point. But yeah, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, I think Ernest is such an interesting character because he's such a flawed character and such a complex character. And Scorsese said from when he spoke extensively with the actual Osage people that they said that Molly and Ernest were actually in love in real life. And this is coming from the Osage people, not just Ernest, the real Ernest, saying that he was as a lying tactic. So that's what I think makes it so interesting. And I think the truth is, at least with the portrayal here, that he was really just a weak character who really was never knew how to make a decision for himself and didn't really know how to say no to Bill Hale, which is kind of how he gets caught up in this whole thing and ends up betraying a woman who he actually did love. Apparently, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't really there, but and then I also think actually forgot we've talked a little bit about the teeth, and I think they do a great job for Leo's performance where when you see Shutter Island, Aviator, Wolf of Wall Street, we're obviously all on this podcast big movie fans, and we kind of judge each performance more individually. But for the general audience, there's a lot of people who will watch those films and just they can't really see it as a fresh character because it's just it's Leonardo DiCaprio. And when someone achieves that level of stardom, it can be hard at sometimes to separate them from the character who you identify most with them, and I think the teeth help subtly let the more general audiences feel like it's a new character and it's not the same Leonardo DiCaprio that they're used to seeing. So I think that helps a lot in terms of how people feel about his performance. But there's just so many sides to this character, and we more just see him make the decisions he makes without ever really knowing the why. We never really know the truth of what's going on in his head. We don't really know his motive. We'll see him one situation feel like he's a loving husband, and then see him as like he just does whatever Hale says. And what the truth about how Ernest felt, I think, is a mystery of the world because it's he's just one of those characters who kind of just goes through letting other people make his decisions. But I think one sequence that really is a great kind of insight to his character is, right after, he's like with Molly and her family, and then like that juxtaposition, then we see him robbing Osage people with some of his friends, and it's like it's not. Then we see it's not even because he was like struggling financially. It's because he wanted money to gamble with, and he just liked the thrill of gamble and just the intensity in Leo's face in those gambling scenes as he gambles with stolen money. I think is very revealing about the character and how he felt just with that he was just chasing a thrill and he just I guess enjoyed the thrill of it. And I think he's the type of character who probably felt if I don't think he felt and thought one specific way. I think his feelings towards everything often changed based and his kind of philosophy changed based on whatever situation he was in, which is I think it takes an actor of Leonardo DiCaprio's quality or talent to and curiosity to really be able to capture the just the layers and the different feelings or motives of this character. And another I think really great like example of the infiltration that this film portrays is when he gets the I forget what the character's name is, but he has the mustache, the guy who's like he's a pretty poor character, and he gets him to kill the character who is allegedly Molly's first husband, who we actually never really know if he was or not. I'm sure you could fact check it, but uh, we're hearing that from Bill Hale, and on a rewatch, we're obviously not trusting anything Bill Hale says. So for all we know, he might have never actually been Molly's first husband. And that's also where we're seeing a new perspective on Hale, where he's like, yeah, we got to keep him alive. And at first we think, oh, maybe he does care for him, and then it's, oh no, this guy owes him money, and he needs him to stay alive a little longer so that he can benefit from it financially. Where, like I said, without this big turning point moment to Hale's character, it's subtly changing our feelings towards Hale and making us start to question his his personal motivations. But then So he gets the one guy to do it, and it's not like The Irishman or Goodfellas where it's like, all right, we need this guy dead, go kill him, bang, next scene, shot him dead. It's like months of infiltration and earning his trust and uh, just earning his trust and building a friendship. And it's like just the time taken with the murders and the levels of infiltration are all for that one murder. I think reflects the entire nature of this story in that way. And when we see, because we see him shoot the way he shoots him in the back of the head, we're all thinking, well, wait, that doesn't look like suicide. Like we're confused. Like, how does he play? Is he going to get away with this because it's really remote? Like, it's like I said, Scorsese's not laying out the motives for us right away. And then we learn that it actually was because that character felt guilty about it, that he just didn't, he felt like he owed it to that person for his murder to have a chance at being solved one day. And I just think that one murder perfectly captures everything about the story as a whole. But I'll pass it off to Will.
Yeah, I totally agree. That scene that you were just talking about is one that I wanted to touch on. And I think the most powerful part about it is that they're sharing a drink beforehand. They're laughing, giggling. They're actually enduring a good time. These two people could like each other in a different situation. They could be friends. So it's just kind of that, different perspective there. And Scorsese kind of shows you that it's just maliciousness and greed that gets people killed when, in theory, these people could have been friends. Nobody had to die. So again, just like it makes it all that more heavy, packs a punch, and just makes that kill so much more emotionally impactful. But in regards to oh, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. Well, I can kick it back to Ryan. But yeah, that's a really good scene. Like, I think that kill, and they definitely did a good job of like showing that these people are human, and like humans are killing humans here, and there are consequences to what's going on. And like you said, that scene perfectly exemplifies that.
Yeah, it was almost quite a comedic moment in the movie when you kind of realize that he screwed up his like task of killing him. I didn't actually pick up that like he done it on purpose. I don't know if I just missed that. I thought he just screwed it up because I kind of was nervous or wasn't thinking
Well,
about the exact.
he has that moment behind the car where he's like contemplating it, right? Like the guy's sitting in the passenger seat, he goes to behind, then he's like thinking about it, and then he just turns around and shoots him in the back of the head. So yeah, like he didn't want to do it. He definitely did not want to, but yeah.
Yeah. Just another kill as well that we haven't really covered yet. Rita's death. Well, Rita and her husband and the maid. That's a very like cool scene. Well, not cool. That's a really good way to describe it. Interesting scene. It's good. You kind of see Ernest and Molly. Like it's quite a quiet scene. You see them going to bed. You're kind of not really expecting anything to happen. You're expecting a fade away maybe to just to end the scene, and then just a massive explosion. Their window blows up, and there's this big emotional scene after it where it's almost as if Ernest looks like he had no idea like that this was gonna happen. I don't think it's really set out that he knows they're gonna blow up, but yeah, so Leo does a really good job in that scene. I don't think he expected them to kill her quite in a gruesome way. He just kind of wanted them to or order them to kill her. So yeah, and when he comes back and tells Molly what happened, I think that is one of the most emotional scenes in the movie. Just Gladstone's reaction to that is heartbreaking. That's definitely one of her best moments in the movie. But yeah, just that was one of the kind of big set piece moments of the movie, I think. But yeah, I don't know if you guys had anything else to add about the murders.
Yeah, sorry, I just my thought came back to me, but I was thinking about what Alex was saying about like the time we spend with these characters, and I think this slow infiltration that kind of takes place of the Osage community works really well with this long runtime because it kind of happens in the background. Like it's not like these white guys are on the outside and then all of a sudden they're married in. It's like a very slow kind of grindy process where they slowly infiltrate. And I think the fact that the movie is 3.5 hours, most people would balk at that, but I think it works. Like sitting with these characters and spending the amount of time you do with Ernest and Molly just makes the relationship seem so much more real and makes the gravity of the situation seem so much more impactful. Like Ryan said, when Molly's at the bottom of the stairs and Ernest comes back from the the house exploding, and he has to shake his head that they're dead. Molly just completely loses it, and that's easily her Oscar moment for me. Like, such a powerful scene where she's just completely ripped of everything. Her community, her family, her heritage, everything is just gone from her at that very moment. Again, great visual storytelling. She's at the bottom of the stairs. Ernest at the top of the stairs looking down at her, showing the levels there to communicate the power hierarchy. But I really do think that it is important that these characters take the full 3 hour runtime to kind of acclimatize to one another and infiltrate another, I guess. But that's just kind of what I wanted to talk about when Alex was talking about that. So we can move on to maybe the FBI investigation when Jesse Plemons comes in, when that kind of kicks off the third and final act.
Sorry, I just wanted to add in something quickly. Going off what you're kind of saying about the power hierarchy, things like that. A scene I'm surprised hasn't been talked about enough. Well, not enough, but in the way that the film community usually would, is the scene. I can't remember when it comes in. Leonardo DiCaprio literally getting spanked by Robert De Niro, like a child. And I think that's such a kind of weird and kind of out of pocket way of doing it almost. But I think it, like Will was saying, that power dynamic, just showing the levels of the power that kind of De Niro's character holds over even DiCaprio's character, kind of using him like a minion almost, which you almost not feel for DiCaprio, but you kind of see that he's just being used kind of more and more by De Niro's character. But obviously there's kind of levels to it, because it's not just kind of black and white, in the sense that De Niro's character is just using Leo to get to the Osage for the money and for the murders. There's a lot more than that to it, but I think that's a really kind of clever way of Scorsese showing that power, because it's not something that we would expect, and it kind of shocked, I'm pretty sure, all of us when watching that.
Yeah, he treats him like a literal kid. He spanks him like a kid in timeout. So you're totally right with the power dynamic there, puppet master, and it just exemplifies that totally. Yeah, a very uncomfortable scene, I guess. I was not expecting that, but it was good. Like, the gothic setting, like, you kind of walk in there and then you realize something bad's gonna happen. Like, but they took an interesting twist, interesting artistic decision to go the spanking route. But I commend Scorsese for it.
Yeah, and it also shows, like I said, like Leo is someone who or Ernest is someone who lets other people make his decision, and is a very weak-minded character, and I think that's the perfect example of it, because most grown men are not gonna just voluntarily like allow that to happen, and the fact that he had very little resistance there, I think, says a lot about what a weak-minded character Ernest is, and how we don't really know what he wanted himself, because he's not someone who really acts on his own desires as much as he does what he's told to do. But yeah, and as for what's up?
I just wanted to say a bit quickly, adding to kind of that Rita house scene. I really wish they hadn't put that in the trailer, because I kind of knew it was coming. Because I kind of watched the trailer a few times, and kind of obviously it played in front of films, and I really wish they hadn't put that in the trailer, because I knew it was coming, and I was quite annoyed because it's such an impactful scene. But even though it was still in the trailer, I still kind of felt that kind of level of emotion coming from Gladstone, and I totally agree. I think that's that kind of moment that kind of the Oscars look for, unfortunately, because they only kind of like those kind of big flashy performances, or like big kind of screaming scenes, even though I think her performance is fantastic in a really, really subtle way. But yeah, I really wish I hadn't put that in the trailer.
I didn't even remember it being in the trailer. It was almost like a jump scare, like when it happens. I just remembered as well, like when they go and check Rita's body, that is so gruesome, where the back of her head has just got some great practical effects like there. Yeah.
And at first I questioned if she's still even alive. Like, you see like a little bit of movement from her, like
yeah, they think she is alive. They go to support her neck like she is alive. Oh, that was a crazy scene.
It's like, oh, it's a botched murder, and it's like maybe she's dying or is about to die, and maybe she's gonna say something that she saw before she died. And it's like, oh no, she's not just dead. She's dead in a disgusting way that you're gonna remember. But you're making me very Oscar's making me very happy that I did not watch any trailers because this one it's like I'm
Mm.
taking any chances. Like football games head down in like in between commercial breaks. Like I won't see
Yeah,
anything.
as you come over here, we didn't have as much ads and commercials like in the UK for things like that. Like watching American football games, this is so commercialized, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
And like
but
the second I saw that bedroom, like the bedroom with the glass window, I knew it was coming. Like you're totally
Yeah.
right. It's just that's the iconic shot from the trailer that we all saw, or at least three of us saw. So that right when you see that place, you know it's going to happen. So I agree. The impact was a bit lost, but the aftermath definitely was not lost on me.
yeah, I think that's though like it makes me very happy I didn't see the trailer because I also knew it was coming, but for a different reason. And when you look through Scorsese's whole career, he's always never shied away from something that's a bold, creative choice that can be criticized a lot and it is criticized a lot. I don't think it should be, and that's the unmotivated camera move. Most iconically in Taxi Driver, that scene where he's on the phone and the camera noticeably moves away from Travis Bickle, and just where the camera moves in a way where you're questioning why it's moving. And that's what Scorsese does in that scene. Is that they're on they lay in the bed and it seems like it's like okay, him and his wife are in love. And then it just backs up to the window. And the human eye is drawn first to movement, second to brightness. And so the window being the brightest thing, our eyes naturally gravitate towards the window. And just as someone who's seen a lot of films, I'm like, all right, something's gonna happen with that window. Like something's coming through. And then it's like it creates a moment of anticipation, I think, even if you haven't seen the trailer, just by the unmotivated camera move. And I think one of the most brilliant things filmmakers can do is put an idea in your head before it happens and make you know it's going to happen without saying anything. It's something that I try myself to do, and I think Scorsese brilliantly does that here by making you, even if you haven't. It's. I wish that you hadn't seen the trailer and knew because I was curious if you guys did know, just based on the unmotivated camera move and drawing your eye to that window. If you just have that natural sense that something is going to happen there, which I thought was a brilliant filmmaking by Scorsese. And then, yeah, of course, you all talked about it, Lily Gladstone, how effective her performance is with that scream, and kind of how we're moving through the house in like a floating, unmotivated camera move way where we don't know it's Leo's perspective yet. And we go into a room, and then like another door that's unseen slides in front, which is so subtle, but also like just another really subtle, unsettling thing right before an even more unsettling performance where we have like the screams of the children and there's no words in the scene. All Leo does is like give her a look, and it's the screams are what heightens all the story beats. It's like first it's just movement, no words, then it's the look, and we hear the baby screams, then we hear Molly screams even more intense. And just with the sound and visuals and no words, it creates one of the most memorable and kind of like uncomfortable scenes to watch. And then they follow that up with she goes to Washington, where we see another one of those black and white scenes where what the rest of the world saw versus what the truth was. So, like I said, very little black and white scenes because the world saw so little of the Osage people. But after that, we get another one of those moments, which we know will major impact on the rest of the film. Where now we can get into the FBI, the arrival of the FBI. With Jesse Plemons, and Leo is so good in many Scorsese films at playing a character who's, like, kinda hiding something, and he has, like, a layer of confidence in the way he's hiding it, but there's just the tone in his voice changes in such subtle ways, like the scene where Jesse Plemons shows up at the door, and I just think the tone changes in Leo's voice are so, it's such a brilliant way of communicating that, he portrays it in the words he says as if he's not scared of the FBI, but very subtly lets Jesse Plemons know, even if that was the first scene of the movie, you would just have that slight feeling that Leo's hiding something. And I think that's another example of what makes him such a brilliant actor and just that thin texture of the screen door between them, which is so thin that it barely changes the way they see each other. But for Leo, it's like just them letting him in through that very thin screen door makes such a difference. And it's like the thinnest his time's coming, but he just still has this very thin layer of protection before they eventually will figure out what he's been doing. But yeah, Oscar, what were your thoughts on the whole investigation?
Yeah, this is kind of picking it up again, and I really like this scene. I thought Jesse Plemons was just absolutely fantastic. I think he's such a good actor, and he's such good at playing that kind of really kind of neutral actor, kind of not over dramatic. We've seen it in things like Game Night before. I think he suits that role perfectly, and this kind of reinforces that. And he was definitely one of my favorite performances of the entire film. I really enjoyed seeing him. Deserved more screen time, honestly. But yeah, I really like this. You kind of see the kind of start of Leo's character breakdown almost. You starting to see him crack at points. And then we get further into that FBI investigation, and he's starting to worry, and then that obviously leads to his arrest scene, which I think was really good. And then obviously you get the bits in jail where he kind of starts to realize what's going on, because there's kind of moments of almost disbelief, and you can see in his character's faces. He's trying to move Jesse Plemons' character along, kind of to dismiss himself, but obviously he keeps on coming back to him again and again. But yeah, I thought that worked really well from a direction standpoint. But the stuff afterwards, I think for me, this is where the film loses some of the steam kind of after this kind of arrest case. And I think once we move into the courtroom drama, which we'll get into in a bit, I think that's where it loses a bit of steam for me. But yeah, kind of up to this point, I think is really fantastic. And I feel like this kind of the whole scene adds to it really well. And yeah, Jesse Plemons just really adds to everything that this kind of act had going for it, honestly. Ryan?
Yeah, I really like the inclusion of or how they done the inclusion of the FBI in this. Like, they weren't really coming in as like the saviors of the movie. They were almost kind of incompetent in how they took so long to actually come and investigate it. With most of the like government just completely ignoring all the problems. And yeah, Jesse Plemons is possibly one of the more underrated actors like working there now. And I think his inclusion was good for what he done. I would have liked to see more of him. That's not really a criticism. I wouldn't really cared about seeing more of the FBI. It's more just Jesse Plemons, because, like Leo and De Niro, like when they announced that they're all working on the film, like Jesse Plemons was someone that I was really excited about working with Scorsese again. But I didn't really feel like he had much to do. But I don't know what they could have done with FBI. It's more just I would have liked to see more Jesse Plemons on screen. But yeah, he delivers so many great performances as a supporting actor. I don't know if this is one of his best, because he just didn't have much to do, but he's always great to see. Well, what did you think about Jesse Plemons? Or just
Yeah, I
FBI?
think. Yeah, no, I think. I think originally the Jesse Plemons character was actually supposed to be Leo's character. They was
Yeah.
supposed to follow the FBI agent, and Leo was supposed to be the main character. But after a couple rewrites or month production, they just decided to scrap that whole idea. So I think you're totally right. Jesse Plemons kind of plays this not one note, but almost simple, reserved. He does what he needs to do. He's a backboard. He can just bounce off of. And that's kind of what he does best. Is he a better actor than Tom Hardy? Absolutely. Is he underrated? Absolutely.
Was that straight?
Whoa. He's a better actor than Leo.
Whoa!
That's outrageous.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely. He
We're
is.
reviewing bits of all films. Come on, that is just a nonsense statement.
No, I genuinely think that Jesse Plemons is a better actor than Tom Hardy. This
Come on,
role,
in this film. Where is the shade coming from?
just Tom Hardy had to catch a stray. I'm sorry, there was no beating around the bush.
Leo catch no strays while we're talking about
Yeah,
this.
exactly. Leo gets enough slander. Okay, Leo was fantastic, but sorry,
He doesn't get
back to Jesse Plemons. He did a really good job, but I think like how it kind of devolved into a courtroom drama. Like Scorsese must have seen Oppenheimer, because it was almost like beat for beat how it like devolved into that. But it was still pretty cool. The third act is definitely like the slowest or the worst paced, but I don't think this movie is poorly paced at all. If anything, it's fast paced. It's got a good pace. It's got a really nice tempo to it. But I think the third act definitely is the slowest of the three, and maybe the weakest of the three. I would have seen maybe like to see something a little bit less or something else. I don't really know, but I definitely liked the inclusion of Plemons and the FBI, and I liked how there wasn't like a savior complex. I liked how they just kind of slid in for that minimum role. It worked for me really well, actually. But Alex, did you have any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, backtracking a little bit. Actually, I want to talk briefly about the film's use of color because I think it really is brilliantly used. So if you notice, the film is obviously very desaturated, mostly very bland of color, except for I think it's three shots of the film. And those are the first one we see is when they talk about the flower moon, and we see the pink and white flowers and just how bright and saturated they are. And if you notice, the saturated, bright, vibrant colors are only used for kind of sacred things for the Osage people. They're used again when Molly's mother dies and enters the afterlife, where we see like this bright green hills contrasted with the very saturated red. And then at the very final shot again, we see very saturated colors with that overhead shot. And I think it's very interesting how Scorsese uses color in such a calculated and very specific way, and really how he limits the color palette to give it such a grand impact for things that are very sacred to the Osage people. And Scorsese faith has always been a big part of Scorsese films, and I think he really uses bright, vibrant colors to showcase the beauty and the faith of the Osage people, which is a kind of another continuation of some career themes of Scorsese. And I think one of the most incredible visual sequences of the film is another comes with another Scorsese lifelong career theme, which is the way he uses fire, which dates all the way back to Mean Streets with Harvey Keitel's character and putting his finger on the flame, and the way he's used fire, and like I said, those ideas of faith and religious imagery, which kind of was a big part of Scorsese's formative years, really comes through here. And it all starts with there's that meeting of the FBI where they all meet, and we see how now they're slowly infiltrating the town, like we also saw at the like the festival, the same way that Bill Hale's people are infiltrating the Osage. The FBI is now infiltrating the town, and it's the conversation's kind of interrupted by they see a fire, and the guy says, "Oh, I just sold Bill Hale an insurance policy." So on the surface, what it's doing is it's letting us know it's revealing character about Bill Hale that he's someone who would do insurance scams. It's letting us know that they're infiltrating, everyday jobs in the town. But what it's really actually doing, it really has no effect on the story. It's actually just creating an excuse for there to be that fire, to create these images in just this extended sequence without any words, all just with the fire. We see the fire in front of Bill Hale, the fire in front of Leo as Molly's sick and is very close to dying. And it looks like the flames of hell with the very, I think, probably the most beautifully composed image where the steam and kind of the waviness, that texture that the fire creates as we look through at the workers, which really looks like a gates of hell type of image. And Scorsese just holds on and reuses that one image, which is just so poetically commenting without any words on the type of people that type of guy Bill Hale is and the consequences, the potential afterlife actions of characters like Ernest and Bill Hale. And he's not saying, Bill Hale's an evil guy. This is an example, just seeing the images like this and how long he lingers on them to make you really look at them and question them and feel things about these fiery images are really says a lot about what Scorsese as a filmmaker wants to say about these characters, which I think is just some of his most brilliant uh, storytelling through moving images, and is Scorsese on his absolute A game, kind of as a culmination of his career with the way he's used fire without his career in very thematic ways. So I'll pass it off to Ryan for what are your thoughts on Act Three? Because I also know, I know that you and Will are very, very big fans of the Brendan Fraser performance as well. So I'm sure you have a lot to say for that. But what are your thoughts on Act Three as a whole, not just that great performance that I know you love?
Yeah. So eventually, the FBI do get Ernest. He's arrested and goes to court, and then in comes the best performance in the whole movie, Brendan Fraser. Listen, I love Brendan Fraser. I was so happy when he won the Oscar last year. Yes, it's the kind of performance that we didn't really see from the rest of the film. But it's a courtroom, and the type of like period that it's set in. I think it's or it makes sense that he's kind of that more shouty, like character. And just in general courtroom scenes, we would expect him to be shouting like that. Even John Lithgow, like that's like the other lawyer. He's the exact same. Nobody's talking about him. They're just focusing on the whale on the left.
There was something about it. It was just so much worse than John Lithgow. I thought John Lithgow was fine. There's something about his acting that just makes his melodramatic acting so bad in those kind of scenes, and it was just so out of place.
It was like a soap opera. Like, dude, like,
It was.
The Young and the Restless was on all week, apparently, leading up to that moment where he had to deliver that exact piece of dialogue. Because it was just over the top. It completely yanked me out of it, honestly. Like, that performance is arguably holding it back from 5 stars. Like, it is a 4.5 because of Brendan Fraser. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it's definitely a change of pace, and the yelling kind of works because it is kind of courtroom, but yeah, it just didn't work for me. He was drummed up to be a supporting character, so I was excited how he'd contribute. Completely negatively contributed to the film. Didn't think he needed to be in there at all. Really didn't like that scene at all. So those are my quick thoughts. But Ryan, you can kind of finish what you were about to say.
Yeah. I really did. I kind of understood it the first time. People did laugh as well in my screening the first time, and nobody did the second time. But I really didn't think it was that big of a deal. I quite liked it. I think it really commanded, especially the scenes after that. When you go into the room with all the people and Ernest walks in, he kind of stole that scene. And again, kind of showing like Ernest how like he isn't like the main person, is kind of like takes commands. Like Brendan Fraser kind of like instructs everything that he's gonna do for like the rest of the court, like drama scenes. But yeah, the only thing I didn't really like was he shouts like "you silly boy" or something at him. I thought that sounded weird, but that was more of like a writing problem, I think, rather than just his delivery. I don't know. I really didn't think this performance was nearly as bad as people were making out to be. But yeah,
honestly, I didn't realize people were going to be so upset. Like, I thought I was going to be like the only person upset with the performance, but clearly people don't like it because the discourse has been crazy. Like I know.
Like the turning on his whale performance is insane. Like as soon as he won that Oscar, like everybody turned on him.
I was happy he won. I was happy for that, but I despise that film with a passion.
He robbed Mescal, so I don't condone this.
Did.
Well, Mescal was never going to win it, so.
To be fair, he did. It was always between him and Austin Butler, and out of those two, I think he had the better performance. But yeah, for me, kind of that kind of third act as a whole, I thought the emotion was working kind of well up to then. I just thought that kind of last act kind of lacked like that emotional payoff that I was looking for between like the two lead characters, which is what kind of Scorsese talked about beforehand in his talks about this kind of this pivotal role between these two characters, which worked well up until then. But I just felt it lacked something in that by having that courtroom drama, and then kind of you get obviously that kind of very last scene with Scorsese, which I respect the risk that he took with that, but for me it just didn't quite work and just get across what the effectiveness of what it could have been, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of like Scorsese's like past movies kind of influenced the courtroom things as well. I think at the end when Ernest is kind of giving up everybody and he's pointing out his uncle, that's exactly like the end of Goodfellas. Pretty much exactly like pointing at him and like saying who's ratting out everybody else. But yeah, did you have anything to add about all that, Alex?
Nothing major. I guess just a couple wrap up thoughts. Like, I think one thing really with Leo's character, we've talked a lot about, what a weak character he is, and if you notice, him deciding between Hale and the FBI, it's like whoever he's in the room with, that's whose side he's taking. Like when he's with the FBI, he's ready to rattle on Hale. When he's with Hale, he's ready to flip on the FBI, and it's just that I think is more just the final confirmation of Leo's actions weren't, I guess, they were horrible, but they weren't like with any personal, I guess, malicious intent as much as they were. He just is someone who goes through life with making decisions guided by other people because he really doesn't have like a strong boundaries or like strong mind of his own in any way. And And I think this really confirms that, just the way he flip flops based on whoever he's in the room with in that moment. And I think De Niro does a great job with Hale, where he's till the very end super confident. In his voice, like there's never any type of fear that he's going to go down. He is so confident that he's going to walk right out of there, like no, not do a single day in jail. Like his the confidence De Niro plays, I think, is great. And I guess one small criticism I have. So the book was originally the book itself, if you read it, is from Jesse Plemons' character's perspective, and I know they were doing script changes up all even as they were shooting. But I do think for a film about the corruption on this level, the FBI is a little too squeaky clean. I think as Scorsese tends to tackle corruption, I think they're portrayed very squeaky clean. But this is the early years of the FBI, so things like this tend to start clean and then often get corrupted over time. So maybe that was the reason. But, also, yeah, just small note, I love when Leo gets arrested and says he's not gonna testify. Just the texture of, like, kind of the blown out lights and that real soft texture through the glass that Scorsese uses just creates great images, and then Jesse Plemons' voice is hilarious. He's like, "You're not gonna testify? Okay," like, tough. So it's like, "Alright, well, you don't want us to help you? Alright, well, you're going to jail." Like, I just think his voice in that scene is hilarious. Like, he's, like, just so, like he's, like, thinking, like, "Are you really this dumb?" Like, "Alright, like, idiot." Like, I just think the tone in his voice, I was cracking up in that scene. But, yeah, I think those are pretty much my wrap-up thoughts in terms of everything in the courtroom.
Yeah,
I
what
did
did you sorry,
so
Alex, what did you think about Scorsese making the decision to put himself on stage and deliver those final lines himself? Because we have seen in the past that he sometimes throws himself into movies, but I feel like this assertion was very deliberate. Did you have any strong feelings about the ending?
Yeah, I totally do. So I know some people have mixed feelings about the radio show, and I think the beginning of it is another one of those, or actually, I think right before we touch on that, just that final moment between Molly and Ernest, just where it's almost like The Godfather, just him surrounded by the empty seats, and it's like what that relationship with Hale cost him. Out now he's just alone in the world with no one. It was a very strong and powerful moment. And how we don't show Molly there, we just hold on Ernest, and it's like all on his face, and the focus is on him. She leaves off screen, and we only hear it, but we can hear like a hard slam of the door, like the anger in her footsteps from the sound design. I thought was great. But as for that scene, it's like at first, like, wait, what are we looking at? Like, this is obviously in the future, and I think Scorsese has a big appreciation for other art forms, and the Foley art of that scene that he draws our attention to, I think is, and like we said, inspired by the filmmakers he inspired. There's obviously some Wes Anderson influence there with the theatrical elements. Strong red. Scorsese loves the color red, the way it heightens emotion. And as for like I said, it's back to the thing of what the world saw versus what the reality was. And what the world saw is eventually portrayed as just another true crime story. It's something you tune into for 30 minutes for entertainment, to be honest. Those type of shows are entertainment purposes rather than awareness. And I think when Scorsese steps in, it really shifts the tone from that uh, the entertainment to it, where we're not really hearing the Foley art anymore. And at first, it's like you think it's gonna be another speaker, and then you hear the voice. And if most people, I think, recognize the voice, especially if you're seeing a movie like this, where it's like, oh shit, it's Scorsese. And I think a big part of it is he felt this was an important story that needed to be told, and was driven by the curiosity of kind of how no one. I'm sure Scorsese read the book and it's like, how did I never know that something like this happened? Because people love to. We always hear about the great massacre, the great grand scales of like injustice and horrors and history. But because it was such a subtle and kind of played out over a long period of time way, I think that's why it gets forgotten. And just the way he delivers that line, that there was no mention of the murders, I think is the core of really Scorsese showing why he wanted to tell this story. And Scorsese knowing that it's possible for this to end up being the last film he ever makes. Hopefully, we're all praying that it isn't, but he knows that's possible. And uh yeah, he would, and I think he wanted the impact of saying, not everything there's always more to the story than what you see, and is wants people to have that curiosity to dig in more, because curiosity is a lot of what drove him into this story and everything else that he does. So I think it was very intentional that he was the one who delivered the important message of that for so long no one knew anything about these murders that had ever happened, and now that it's we need to do more to tell these types of stories, and that cinema does need to be kept alive in the form of stories like this, not just the Marvel movies where you can turn your brain off and be entertained like a true crime story, but also stories that have real meaning and have real lessons to be learned from some not so great uh, chapters of history. And I think that's why it was important that he delivered that himself. But I'll pass it off to Oscar. What are your thoughts on the wrap up of the film?
Yeah, I kind of just touched on it briefly earlier. I think like I said, I respect the risk that kind of went with this, because obviously this is not kind of your usual way to kind of wrap up a film. It didn't quite work with me in terms of kind of how it came across and how kind of effective I thought it was as an ending. I think the very, very kind of ending scene that we come back to, I think the very ending is the drums, isn't it? If I'm not mistaken, or is this the very ending scene? I can't remember. I think it's the drums actually. But yeah, like I said, it's an interesting way of doing it, but yeah, it just didn't quite kind of sit right with me from kind of what I remember from my first watch. But yeah, it's an interesting way of doing it, and absolutely not what I expected.
Yeah, it didn't really work with me all that well either. I didn't really love the complete change there, but I understand that it's probably personal to him and that's something that he wanted to do. It's just there's a moment when William Hale is in prison and he basically says, "Shit goes on, like life goes on. People will know I committed these heinous crimes, but nobody will care. Like time heals all wounds," type thing. And I think if you're gonna let William Hale deliver that line, it's kind of have to be the needle drop. You can't go back and then bring up this historical context. So I don't know. I felt like it had kind of two endings in a sense, and I didn't appreciate Scorsese hopping in to give his ending, whereas I wanted the movie's ending maybe. A little bit too documentary for me, where I wanted something a bit more drama. But like I said, he obviously had an infatuation and affinity with the story and a very personal connection to the characters. So again, I'm on Oscar's side. I praise the risk, and can't really say much else about that. Ryan?
No, I really did like it. I think maybe the actual movie part was maybe a bit unsatisfying in the way it ended because it was quite abrupt. How it just kind of cut to this kind of stage reenactment. But yes, like Alex said, like I think it is very much Wes Anderson. He's took kind of a book straight out of one of the other great movies of the year, Asteroid City. Kind of that like fourth wall break theater reenactment. I thought it was quite a cool way of doing like a kind of twist on the usual like Scorsese. A lot of Scorsese's movies end on like the kind of black screen, just white text explaining what happened to the characters. So I thought this was quite a creative way of doing it, with all the sound guys like making all the sound effects and stage actors pretending to be the characters from the movie. But yeah, I did enjoy that part. And Scorsese just coming in to finish it off, explaining what happened to Molly. I mean, I thought that really was like a touching part of the movie. Kind of explains that Molly died of her diabetes later on, and then but there was still no mention of the murders, and so it's just a really important acknowledgement of like what he was trying to do with the movie and bringing this forgotten past really to the forefront again, because I know it's in some states they still aren't even allowed to talk about that parts of history, like in books or anything, or like they're just banned. I don't remember what state it was, but it's just not allowed to talk about it at all in schools. So it's a really important like subject to just kind of bring to the forefront and back into the talking of everybody. Yeah.
Totally
Anybody
agree.
else have anything else to add about the ending?
Yeah, the last thing I guess I'll just say, because like I mentioned, there's that final shot of Ernest with all the empty seats around, just how he's kind of all alone. And then Scorsese, it's not as clear of a contrast because that stage sequence separates it. But then after we have the final shot of just the overhead buildup, and all it is what it really does is with the bright saturated color, which is rare in the film, showing that despite what happened to them, the Osage people are still alive and well today because of the community they have. And while Ernest spent his life following Bill Hale, whatever he told him to do, the Osage people still have their community. And the reason that they were able to survive the events of things like this is because of how strong the bonds of their community is. And I did like that kind of communal ending for their people that he gave the film, and saying, even though this was done to them, they survived it because they still had each other. So I thought that was a very nice and kind of uplifting way to end the film. But that pretty much wraps up all of my thoughts. Another brilliant entry from Martin Scorsese, who is always innovating, always expanding on his style, always playing around and trying to find new ways to tell stories with pictures. And this is a film I really just hope that people go out and support, because we need films like this to get to theater screenings, and we need them. We need to keep cinema like this alive. A film that's not a big IP franchise and is not a constant action and stimulation, but really has something to say and has a clear vision and an artistic voice behind it. And I think that it's important that these films stay alive. And hats off to Martin Scorsese for another brilliant, crafted piece of cinema.
Absolutely. One of the best films of the year, in my opinion. So it was rightly so one of my most anticipated, because it absolutely delivered, and King Marty stays on top, honestly. So thanks a lot, Marty.
Mhm. Yeah, I hope we continue to see stuff like this get released, because obviously Apple are like kind of pushing that theatrical release for their movies, whereas we're seeing Netflix with Fincher like not really fully releasing the film at all and just going straight to their streaming service, kind of prioritizing that. But I hope we continue to see these long length like movies get released to theaters.
Absolutely. And as always, go watch the movie in theaters. Let us know what you thought. Tell us how wrong we were, how right we were. I want to hear your feedback in the comments. I love arguing with people, so let us know. But that was the Killers of the Flower Moon episode. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.